the truth is that there's facts, there's circumstances, and then there's the stories we tell ourselves. Our brains are very good storytellers. And so really helping people parse out like what is true and factual, and then what is the story we tell ourselves. Our thoughts are a lavush, just like our clothing and we can look in our closet and decide, does this fit me? Does this look good on me? Is this the right season for this or the right weather? Oh, it has a hole. Like we could literally swap out our clothing. We can swap out our thoughts. But we don't realize that without that knowledge, right? That like thoughts are optional. Every single thought is optional and replaceable. And so learning to kind of like, yeah, cleaning up the mental mess. Like what's the set of thoughts that I'm telling myself about myself? And then like, what result am I getting by thinking this way? And do I like that? Do I like what I'm creating in my life when I'm thinking this way? And realizing that it's just a story.
Hey, I'm Esther, and you are listening to On Your Own, the podcast for Jewish girls living away from home. Each week, we bring you an inspiring person or message to help you confidently navigate life on your own so you can achieve real growth and independence and take ownership of this foundational stage of your life. For additional resources, tips, and to stay up to date on future episodes, sign up for the On Your Own newsletter, linked below in the description. Looking forward to spending some time with you today. And now, to this week's episode. How did you become a coach and get into the coaching field?
So I'm on Shluchas now for coming up to 13 years. And when I first moved on Shluchas, I had 2 little kids and I was expecting. And I had my third under 3 in my first year of Shluchas right away. And it was actually the first time that I experienced postpartum depression. Had no idea what was happening or what that was. It was like a really intense experience. And that's actually when I went to my first therapist. And I ended up working with her for a long time. And I kind of see like depression as like this like wave that kind of falls over you but it kind of like reveals all the stuff underneath the water that you have to work on. So it's like it kind of revealed all this other stuff like low self-confidence and just all these things that like really needed work. Anyway, so I worked with her for a long time and it was amazing. And it was like really, really like changed so much for me. And I just remember one day saying like, I want these tools. Like so much has changed for me since working with you. And she was the one who said to me that I should become a life coach. I actually didn't even know what a life coach was. I went home and researched it, but she was really the one who encouraged me to start. And so I kind of just for fun, I don't know, for fun. Like I didn't really know what I was going to do with it or where it was going to go, but I enrolled in a coaching certification and it kind of took off from there. And then I ended up, being a coach and taking clients and working with Chabad moms.
Wow. Okay. Super interesting. I feel like there's a lot of misconceptions about like what a coach is and what life coaching is. So I was wondering if you can share like what does it mean to be a life coach and what is the coaching process?
Yeah. I mean, I do have to say that like it is even just like the word coaching, right? Someone could be a coach and they're a sports coach. So like just the word coaching is its own very broad thing. And there's so many certifications out there. And then so probably even just within coaching, like say what is coaching, there's probably a broad definition and a lot of different modalities and tools even within coaching, which I know sounds kind of funny. But the way I kind of see coaching is that it's very, very action oriented and results focused. So it's kind of like, where are you and where do you want to be? And let me get you there. So that's like just like one way. I feel like it's like very future focused and like, what am I like, can I close the gap between where I am right now and where I want to be? And another thing though, is I just kind of look at it as like, if you're hiring a professional organizer, and they're going to come and organize your closet. So they take everything out and put back everything like only what you need and use and like that. I kind of think of that for the brain. We have 50 to 80,000 thoughts a day. So we're constantly, swirling around in our brain and it's like a disorganized mumble jumble. And when we like kind of like leave our brain to its own devices, it's like toddlers, like 15 toddlers left alone in a house with no supervision, you know what I'm saying? So I think of it as it's also learning how to be very, very intentional with your mind and with your emotions is like another way I would look at it. But you asked like what's the biggest misunderstanding or misconception? Is that what you asked me?
Yeah. So first I was saying like if you could just clarify, and I think that yeah. So would you say that a life coach, what you're describing is specifically a life coach? Is there something unique about when you would say a life coach versus a different kind of coach?
So, I mean, a life coach is just maybe more general, but it's like the idea of someone who's kind of like helping you with anything that can come up in your life. And I think that what we kind of confuse it with is that we think that we only need, like, that you only go to someone or you only get kind of like outside help when you have like big issues or
Mm,
something like that, right? It's like you would
right.
think, or for sure for like therapy, right? Like when did I first go to therapy is like when I was like experiencing postpartum depression. But I wouldn't necessarily have thought like, oh, I'm having issues with my time management and I'm just kind of like dropping my commitments and taking on commitments and like I'm not really following through. Oh, maybe I'll go to a coach. Like we don't necessarily think that a coach can like help us or that or we don't even think of necessarily going to someone. But I think like coaching is just someone who helps you with your life. You don't have to hit rock bottom. You don't have to have major issues. If anything, if the best time I think for coaching is like when we're at a good place, we're at baseline and we just want to like really take things to the next level or grow. We're not meant to solve things on our own. We're meant to grow in connection. So
Yeah, that's very important. That's really probably one of the basic premises of this whole podcast is that I was thinking, people meet all these incredible professionals when they're dealing with such hard situations. That's when you end up with a therapist and then the therapist changes your life. I'm like, well, what about all those people who are kind of like floating and they're not like thriving because
yeah,
no
yeah.
thriving when they're so young and figuring out the world, they don't get to hear this wisdom. So that's where the whole podcast really came from. So discussing this sounds amazing. Like even if you're like I'm okay, like I don't need a professional, whatever I'm using quotation marks. It's like, well, everyone, as you said, everyone needs guidance, everyone needs advice and help, and helping them get better. We all want to get better for
Mhm.
sure. We don't want to stay stuck at 18 um, in terms of like for our whole life. And there are some people who do
Right.
stay 18 even when they're older, and we've probably met some of those. So that's huge. So what you were saying about like that there's like a mess in our mind. What came to mind was I remember seeing a podcast once called Cleaning Up the Mental Mess. I just loved that. Like, because that felt
Yeah.
like it was describing me a lot of my life. It's just a complete mess going on. So what are some tools or things that you work with people on that can help them to actually clean up this mess and become the better versions of themselves and keep going upwards?
Yeah, so definitely there's a whole range of things, but I could just kind of like let's say for an example, someone could have a mental mess about their own self-image and their own self-concept, right? So like when they think about themselves, there's just this mumble jumble of like I'm not good at things, I'm not talented, I'm not capable, I can't handle this, I'm not, just like a whole bunch of like negative self-talk. And because it's not being questioned or it's not being challenged, they just think that they're just telling themselves the truth about themselves. This is just the facts. I'm just letting you know that I'm a procrastinator and that I drop the ball on things and that I'm not organized and that like as if they're just like telling you the news of the world, right? But the truth is that there's facts, there's circumstances, and then there's the stories we tell ourselves. Our brains are very good storytellers, and so really helping people parse out like what is true and factual and then what is the story we tell ourselves. And just like our thoughts are a lavush, just like our clothing. This is what I would say, like just like our clothing and we can look in our closet and decide, does this fit me? Does this look good on me? Is this the right season for this or the right weather? Oh, it has a hole. Like we could literally swap out our clothing. We can swap out our thoughts. But we don't realize that without that knowledge, right? That like thoughts are optional. Every single
Hmm.
thought is optional and replaceable. And so learning to kind of like, yeah, cleaning up the mental mess. Like what's the set of thoughts that I'm telling myself about myself? And then like what result am I getting by thinking this way? And do I like that? Do I like what I'm creating in my life when I'm thinking this way? And realizing that it's just a story. It's not factual. It's not obligatory. Like you don't have to think this way about yourself. And like, people can construct, I mean, I'm one of the, like I did that, like an entire different image of yourself. And then when you think about yourself differently and have real grounded self-confidence, you're going to show up in the world totally differently. So it, it,
Well,
it does change your life. I know that sounds like very, coach speak or whatever. It's like transformational, changes your life. But like it really does when you're going like operating in the world as someone who like is just putting themselves down, thinks very lowly of themselves, compares themselves to everyone else, or when you're operating in the world as like knowing your true value, the uniqueness of your neshama, what you have to offer, and like, and believing in that. You're just gonna, you're gonna accomplish different things. You're gonna go after different things. You're gonna have a different set of like ambitions, or so it really is life changing.
Wow. What you said, thoughts are optional. That was like, whoa. We don't say that. I haven't heard that before. Thoughts are optional. I've heard like,
Yeah.
you control your thoughts, but like thoughts are optional. I'll tell you the truth that it doesn't feel that way though, because a lot of us, including myself, have thoughts that we don't want to think and try to not think them, and it doesn't work. We're like, okay, I need to stop thinking this way, and then we just continue thinking that way. So how do you actually implement this idea of that thoughts are optional when it feels like the same thoughts we don't want to be thinking keep coming back?
Yeah. Yeah. So, like this might be like another tool to kind of explain that. Like sometimes, I call it brick brain and bubblegum brain, but like you might heard of it as like, fixed mindset and growth mindset, right? So like a brick brain, it's just like hard and solid. And, it's kind of like someone could have this belief, like I'm just not organized. And they think they're just telling you the news of the world, right? Like this is how it is. That's brick brain. Like, no, and that thought keeps coming, and even if I try to push it away, and even if I and it's just like, so bubblegum brain is like growth. Like, can we get some space in that thought? Can we create some movement? Because again, like I said, it's optional. Is it possible that in this area I'm organized, right? In this thing I was organized. This one day, you start like noticing other options and other possibilities. So when I say a thought is optional, it really depends where someone's at and what the thought is, right? There's thoughts that like, that we could just like notice it, realize it's optional, and be like, no more. Like you are not allowed in my brain, and I'm just saying no to you, right? Like it could be as simple as that, but for other people or for other thoughts, they just keep coming back, and then you're like believing it again, right? And maybe that one we have to kind of like see what we can replace it with, or what else is true, what else is believable, right? Or we have to kind of do that the bubblegum thing and like see if we can get some space where you can start believing a little bit of something different, and then so it's almost like that's more of like an incremental change in thoughts. So there is a range. It's not, when I say thoughts are optional, it doesn't mean just like that it's as simple as saying, oh, okay, never mind, not that thought, right? But there are multiple ways that we can work with the thoughts that we have. And I'm sure like anyone listening to this podcast, right, could probably think of a thought that maybe they used to have, or a belief that they used to have, maybe when they were younger or something, and they don't currently have anymore, right? And just to prove to yourself that like you could believe so strongly this thing, right? And then now you don't believe that anymore. To show yourself that like thoughts are truly, truly optional.
Wow. So it sounds like really step number one is just getting into that space and that belief of that these thoughts are optional, and then they're not you, and they're not facts.
Yeah.
Like you say, they're not the news of the day. Not that the news is always so facts, but
That's true.
we're gonna have to come up with a different module. No,
A different example. You're right.
a different example. That's more true. It's not Tyra.
Right.
So that's like definitely step number one, so that you can start to actually take a look at the thought instead of just believing it as fact. And then I guess you're saying working with the thought, depending on what the thought is, where you're holding, how strong that thought is, it will look different. Is that what you're saying? The work that you're going to do with it will look different? Okay. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just I want to just go a little bit further here with this, if that's okay. And maybe I'll bringing a specific example. You can bring one tool, but you mentioned self-confidence before, which I think is you mentioned that was something that you were working on, and I think that is a huge thing that a lot of young women deal with, is self-confidence. Even if a lot of girls look very self-confident from the outside, there's usually very, very often things going on inside that would not resemble the face that they're putting out there. So if somebody would come to you with very low self-confidence, they're beating themselves up inside, they really just think that they're worthless, that they're not as good as everybody else, and they really believe that, and those are the thoughts that are running through their mind all the time, thoughts that are causing them to feel a lack of self-confidence. What would you like? Where would you start? Where would you go?
Yeah. So first of all, we kind of have to understand where confidence and like understanding where does confidence come from and worthiness. And it's funny. I'm actually giving this comes up not just for, I guess you work with, with girls or whatever, but I work with moms and it's the same thing there, So I think that lack of self-confidence just is something that is very common as a universal thing. And so I'm actually giving a workshop in December on confidence because it's just been coming up so much with so many people. And anyway, so like, first of all, true like Yiddish self-confidence really comes from understanding that we are a neshama. So we definitely would have to kind of like nail down, like there's what your brain is telling you, right? So there's the thoughts that your brain is telling you about yourself, but then there's like what is true about yourself. So we kind of do have to start with like the MS of the world here, like what is the MS of the world, and kind of nail all of that down. And then we've got, okay, and then there's the story. Then there's all the story that my brain wants to tell me. And we would differentiate between self-confidence versus confidence. So confidence is in my ability to do something, right? And self-confidence is in my ability to believe in me, right? And self-confidence is really going to come from aligning our beliefs with the MS of the world, right? About like who we are and that we're a neshama and all of that. Versus confidence, confidence, like you probably have confidence that you could pour a cup of water. You're not thinking, you're not questioning and asking yourself like, am I going to get all the water in? Is it going to go? Is it right? You just pour it because you know you can do it. Confidence is like your belief in your ability to do something. And so there's plenty of things that you don't even question because you just have rock solid belief that you can do it, right? And then there's things that we don't have belief we can do, and mostly because we've just never done it before, right? And so it requires self-confidence to get us to learn how to do things and have confidence doing them, because self-confidence is like, I'm going to have my own back. I'm going to believe in me as I do this new thing that I've never done before and let myself fail and still trust in myself and still believe in myself and still support myself to keep going, even right all the way until I now have confidence in this new thing, right? Until now I'm like, if you've never driven before, it makes so much sense that you wouldn't have confidence in your driving abilities. But you can have self-confidence, like, I'm going to figure this out. I'm going to learn this. I'm capable of learning something new. Like, that's all like self-confidence that's going to allow you to go take that step of learning how to drive. And eventually in 10 years, you will, or less than 10 years, you'll have a lot of confidence in driving. So one of the biggest mistakes is that we think we have to have confidence in order to do something. And we don't. We actually need self-confidence in order to do something, right? We need to just trust in ourselves enough, like I'm going to have my own back through the failure or through, like actually the way to get to confidence is to do scary things, is to do the things we don't know how to do or that we're scared of doing, not the other way around where we're like, I need to get confident and then I can do this thing. So that's probably also a misconception about it. But anyway, your question was like, what would be the process of somebody? So the way that you would build confidence is actually doing the thing without the confidence. You use self-confidence to do things that then create confidence now that you've done them.
Okay. And where does self-confidence come into that?
Right. And the self-confidence is like the piece number one, where it's like, can I learn to be there for myself no matter what? Can I learn to have my own back? Can I learn to support myself through failure? Can I learn to fail and not beat myself up? Like, let failure just be feedback, or be like, success is built on a stack of failures. So it's really like, the process, let's say, of somebody who is, really, let's say, steeped in low self-confidence, would be understanding really who they are, their unique value, their, what the MS of the world is about them, right? So we got to like really uncover that, and then separate the stories that their brain tells them, separate the way that they're talking to themselves, and retell those stories, recreate that narrative, so that they can have strong self-confidence. And from a place of strong self-confidence, you're going to go do a lot of scary things. You're going to do things you've never done before, or that you don't even know if you can do, and it doesn't matter, right? The confidence follows. It doesn't start.
Okay. The confidence follows, it doesn't start, but it does start with enough self-confidence to get into. So what I'm understanding is the self-confidence is an internal experience, and then the confidence is more of like the external kind of an external thing.
Yeah, like I can, I don't know if this is a good example, but let's say somebody could be, listening and, wow, she sounds so confident on a podcast or something like that. But it's not because I have confidence in doing podcasts. or maybe by now I do, but like it's because I have self-confidence. Like I can do this, I can say like whatever, like I can put myself out there, and it's okay if I mess up, or if it's okay if people don't
Mm,
like it, or it's okay if it's bores some people, or it's okay if it's not what, Esther was looking for, or whatever it is, right? Like I'm okay with that. Like I can still be there for me no matter what comes. And then because I'm willing to do that scary thing, then confidence will follow, where now to the point where, okay, it doesn't scare me to do a podcast. But
mhm.
or like, the example that people give, let's say with public speaking, you don't have to have confidence in order to go say yes to public speaking. You can do it scared. You can be really scared and go give a speech, right? What allows a
Mhm.
person to be so scared but say yes to a speaking opportunity if someone asks them to speak? What allows them to do that
Self-confidence.
is self-confidence. Is like, it's
Mhm.
okay. I don't need everyone to like me. It's okay if I mess up. It's okay if I forget what I want to say, right? Like, because I'm just
Mhm.
gonna like believe that in me and that I have something to offer and that I'm okay no matter what, right?
Wow.
Does that?
Okay. Yes, I got it. That's a huge difference. Like I never thought of self-confidence that way. That's why I was kind of like grilling you on it because it's a new idea for
Yeah.
me. Um, it's definitely a new idea for me. Although I have started noticing more and more that people who I think are just as you get to know people and speak to them, people that I thought were so confident when you speak to them about like what's going on inside, um, actually are actually really not. And there's a lot of negative self-talk like that actually ends up fueling maybe them looking so confident because they feel like they have to put on an extra show. And some people that I've been speaking to lately who I wouldn't think, they're not like the person to get up and speak it. Like, when you start to talk to them, they like themselves, they're happy with themselves. So to separate those two things of like what looks like confidence and what real, like what self-confidence is huge. I guess my question would be how how do we start talking nicely to ourselves when we've been bashing ourselves for like, I don't know, since we became tweens, teenagers, quite a few years where we haven't been speaking nicely to ourselves. We don't actually um, believe that we deserve the self-confidence.
Yeah, which goes back to that idea of like, where does it come from and what does deserving and worthy look like, right? Like, again, back to like the MS of the world, if every single one of us is actually a piece of Hashem, like our worthiness is not, it's not like up for debate. It's not like I'm worthy and you're less worthy and you're more worthy. Like, there's just no such thing. We're all like 100% worthy. Like we put worthiness into a picture where it doesn't like, we don't get to decide. Like you don't get to even decide your worthiness in the sense that like you are 100% worthy. Maybe you're not treating yourself that way. Maybe you're not talking to yourself that way. But like your worthiness is not, I'm like missing the word that I'm looking for, but like it's not debatable.
Mm.
It's not like, it's not changeable. So, but in terms of like if someone's been just so used to beating themselves up, right? The number one thing is awareness. We always start with awareness. Any kind of change you have to first notice what you're doing. You have to see that that's what you're doing. And then I always say, then comes compassion. There's awareness, compassion, and then change, and you can't skip a step. So the next piece is
Oh
compassion. Like
gosh.
you to really feel for yourself, to understand like this is really hard. I've been like walking around for 18 years with a brain that just beats me up, right? Like to really feel for yourself, to understand like this is a very hard human experience, that like my default is just to go straight into self-bashing, right? And so awareness that that's what you're doing and compassion, and then that can lead to change. That can lead to like, and again, this is where we said before, there's a lot of different ways, because for some people it's as simple as like putting a stake in the ground and saying no more, right? Like I will not talk to myself this way. I refuse to tell myself you're not good enough anymore, right? It could be that. And it could be for someone else. They're like, okay, great. I tell myself that and it comes right back. But then again, there's the awareness. Like just because my brain is saying something doesn't mean it's true. Just because my brain is saying something doesn't mean I have to believe it. So even getting a little space from it will reduce the suffering of beating yourself up. There's a difference between like, I'm no good, I'm not good enough, I'm terrible, I don't know what I'm doing, whatever, right? And then you feel terrible. And there's a difference between my brain is telling me I'm no good. My brain is telling me I'm not enough. Even that little amount of space will reduce the suffering or the experience of that kind of bashing a lot, significantly.
Because there's you who is observing the bashing as opposed to you just getting hit.
Yes. Yes.
You're like taking a step back and able to watch it instead of it just being your only experience. And I guess that gives
Yeah.
room for other options because once you step back, you can say, well, this is one thing that's going on in my brain. This is one thought that I'm thinking. Here are
Hmm.
some others. Wow. So that's important that the
Yeah.
awareness be there. Just that awareness that your thoughts are optional and you don't have to believe everything that you think. It's not facts. You could take a step back and like watch it and then feel bad for the claps you've been getting, I guess, for years.
Yeah. Yeah. And that alone is like really powerful.
What would the compassion look like? You mentioned briefly like we're not used to feeling compassion for ourselves. Where can we start with that? What would that look like?
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a great question, actually. I think I want to do a training on that also, because, I talk about having self-compassion a lot and a lot. And sometimes people are like, I don't get it. Like, what does that look like? And so it's very hard to demonstrate, right? Like on a video or even in a conversation, because it is an inner experience, right? It's an experience, it's a feeling that you're going to have inside of yourself. So so different ways that I try to say is like, just imagine that you're giving yourself a big internal hug, right? Like compassion, like Hashem is of harachmim. Hashem is compassion. Hashem is compassion. Like, oh, just, I think of just this warm hug. Like, I see you, I'm here for you, empathy, like, I'm with you in this kind of. Yeah, I'm it's so hard to like, I haven't yet really figured out all the ways that I can. That's why I'm like, I think I want to figure out how to do like a training on this, because it's an inner experience. But the way I experience it is just like warmth inside of my body and kind of like this big inner hug. Like, I see you, this is really hard. It's really hard for you to be so far away from home and navigating life all on your own. Like, that's a big deal. And just like so much compassion for the newness of it and for the difficulty of it, instead of like, and it's just so different. Like, we're used to beating ourselves up, but like another way I say is like, if your best friend came to you with this exact same thing, right? How
Mm,
would you treat her? How, you would just give her so much love, so much
that's
compassion. Like, can you
easier.
do that for yourself? That's
Yeah.
easier, right? So if that's one
Yeah.
way of doing it, is like, how would you treat somebody else in this same scenario? Might be the easiest way we can access what that might look like.
Because we're mostly nice people when it comes to others. So we can we
Yeah.
can build out the scenario there. Like if my friend came to me and told me all of I've been telling myself all the things that you've been telling yourself. And she says that, you'd be like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry to hear that. That's horrible. You'd give her a hug. But when we think that, those things like, why do I keep thinking this? Like, what's wrong with me?
Yeah.
For some reason, it's easier to be nicer to other people. I'm not sure why that is. So that's very helpful. I've been curious because you work with moms, and I know a lot of younger girls who, they don't think that they're ever like that the person that they are right now is the same person that's going to be a mom. Like we usually bring a lot of our
Right.
things with us to that. I never thought that. I thought that moms just like had it together. And then I became a mom and I realized I'm just the same freaked out girl living on her own, but now I have a baby and then another one and then another one. What are the kind of things that when you work with moms, they say, like, I wish that someone had told this to me earlier. Like, I wish I knew this before, or I'd worked on this before, so that by the time I get to being a mom, being a wife, even getting into shidduchim, that I had these tools. I wish I knew it earlier. What are the things that people say?
Yeah. I mean, even I just wish, like, once I kind of like really learned all this stuff, like, we really don't learn mind and emotional management in school, right?
No,
We learn a lot of just,
math.
yeah, exactly. We learn concepts and topics and subjects, right? We don't learn like our inner world, and that there is such a thing as mind management and emotional management. We don't even learn emotions, like I teach even just like that we have a wide range of emotions. Like, our emotional vocabulary is tiny in comparison to like the range of feelings we actually feel, right? We're like, I'm happy, mad, sad, glad, and frustrated, or whatever. Like, we have like 5 words, but there's like tons and tons and tons of flavors of how we could be feeling. So I think it's really a lot of that, is like, we just don't learn mind and emotional management, which is just it's so empowering, right? Kind of like when I said every thought is optional. We just don't even realize how much of our human experience we can like have more like authority over and power over, and like or just like autonomy in, it's just like, instead of like the world happening to me, like learning like how much we can really like be more present to like, how do I want to think about this? And how do I choose to show up to this? And like, do I like how this thought makes me feel? And do I like the results I'm creating? Like all of like that kind of empowerment, I think, is missing.
Like not being defined by the situation we're in, but knowing that like there's a million ways to kind of experience that same thing depending on what's going on inside is what I'm
Yes.
is what I'm
Yes.
hearing.
Yeah, like really learning that like the world doesn't define how we experience things, like we do. And so like just to know that you can, like, two people can go through the exact same thing and experience it completely differently, right? So let's say somebody is you know, I don't know, a certain age and not married and they want to be married, right? So that in and of itself doesn't, wanting to be married by a certain age or whatever and not being married by that age, that in and of itself does not mean, and now I'm going to have this specific experience of being single, right? That's just like the facts. And then there's a whole way that we can experience that. I mean, that's just like one example of many, So that would be something that I think would be, that is most like when, working with moms or moms in my group or whatever it is, that comes up with like, wow, like how we could have, known this ages ago or worked with this ages ago. And then like specific to moms, like mom life in general is, I just think there's not so much like just talk about what it's really like. And then when we're in a group, I mean, I do one-on-one and group, and then in a group to like hear how much of like our experiences are so universal, but like it's not just talked about so much. It's like, oh, no one says this, no one talks about this, no one, right? I think that there's something just like really maybe refreshing to hear about how universal these like experiences really are. So like, a lot of times we think like I'm alone in this, or no one else experienced this, or it's just me, like all versions of that. And just really for everybody to realize that most of that's not true. Like whatever you're experiencing, there are many, many other people experiencing very similar things.
This is a side question, but do you think that like young women who are not yet even necessarily dating, but who are old enough, like 18 and up, let's say, that they should be exposed more to like what mother life is and hear these kind of things, and that mothers should be more open about the experience? Or do you think that's something that once you get into it, it's good to know that there's others who can share? Because like
Right.
didn't know any of this before, and I wonder, is it something that like we should be talking about more to girls who will be mothers but are not yet?
Yeah, I'm not sure either, because sometimes I wonder, like, can you really understand, or do you even care to understand? Like in some ways, I'm like, wow, if we could like, yeah, if we could like, spare somebody else from having to go through this experience by sharing with other people, right? Like I'm all for that. But sometimes I just wonder, like for example, in Kala classes, you're learning Taras Mishpacha, but like, are you learning so much of Shalom Bayis? It's hard to like envision, or like, let's just say in Kala classes, right? Imagine they were giving you a whole postpartum class as part of your Kala classes, but like postpartum is so far from you at that moment that like it doesn't, even though it could be relevant very soon and very necessary, like I don't know if like your brain is necessarily there and able to like, so I don't have like a definitive answer. Like on the one hand, yes, I would love
Yeah.
it. On the other hand, I don't know if it's like sort of like you become a mother, but I want you to know that like there is support, like for everyone in any stage. Like really, I believe that their support is just so, so, so important. No, having someone you could call, and that there's lots and lots of things that with people with expertises out there, and building relationships with people, having a mashpia for sure. A coach, if that's something that you think you would benefit from, or I mean, I think everyone would benefit from, but like, things like that, because it's just so important to have support. We're not meant to do things alone. We're really, really not. And to know that you can like reach out to somebody, and that there's support out there. There's help, there's support.
I hear. So you can never really prepare yourself for the next stage of life because until you're in it, you're not there. Like your mind, your consciousness, you're not open to it. But I guess whatever stage you find yourself in, to learn these tools in that stage, so hopefully you can, transfer them on. And it sounds like these basic principles of what you're saying, learning not to be defined by the outward situation you're in, but rather going into your inner world and learning that that there's
Yeah.
a lot of control you have over that can then be sort of translated, or probably not fully, but to be able to get into that next
Yeah.
stage that I'm hearing.
Yes. A hundred
Yeah.
percent.
Yeah. Because a lot of things I would always say, like, why didn't people just tell me? Like, I don't know, things like miscarriage and yeah, as you're saying, postpartum and all these
Mm-hmm.
things. I never heard the word postpartum depression before I had a baby. Like I didn't know what that was. And so
Mm-hmm.
I always wonder, and I think it's true. Most girls, like, yeah, like it's not even interesting. We want to know like how to get through this, right? Whatever
Right.
they're in. Um, so there's this idea of self-coaching, right? So there's like coaching, and then I've heard of this concept of self-coaching because not everyone can afford a coach or that they're in like the space right now to be, for whatever reason. Um, or, even if they have a coach is available usually for an hour or so a week, let's say. What about the other, I
Yeah.
don't know how many hours are in a week, -1?
Yeah.
So how can we become our own coaches to a certain extent? And what is self-coaching? What might that look like?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I definitely think that learning, like coaching yourself is something that will probably come easier if you have worked with a coach, especially if the coach teaches you kind of how to coach yourself. But not to say that there's not anything you can do to help yourself without that, but just it might come easier. But the idea of self-coaching is exactly like what you said is, there's times that we can work with a coach, but then there's all the stuff that we go through on a day to day that's like, how can I handle this? And the more coaching tools you have, or the more in general self-management tools that you have, the more you're going to be able to be on top of that experience. But the way that I like to start with self-coaching is something I call a thought download, where you just are emptying your brain onto paper. And if that's all you take out of this, and you're like, like in other words, if that's all you do in a certain sense for coaching yourself, it will be so valuable, right? If you're just like burning angry and you're just like stewing in anger, just sit down and just write it all out. Write out what's going on, write out what you're thinking, write out what happened, write out how you see it, because that is the first step to getting some space from your brain. Right? If you're working with a coach, you're saying it to the coach. You're essentially speaking your thought download. Then the coach is going to take that and parse it apart for you, right? But if you did it yourself, just writing it out is what's going to help you see like, oh, what's going on for me, right? And as soon as you do that, again, just that experience of getting some space from it, right? Oh, my brain is telling me these things. This is how I'm interpreting the scenario, right? Like where's all of our agency is in how we think about things, which creates how we feel, and then the actions we take. That's where our agency is. I can't control what the person said. I can't control what the person did. I can't control this thing that happened, but I have so much agency when it comes to my thoughts, my feelings, my actions. And so when you can kind of like start, so I would it starts with a thought download. I mean, I do have like a specific tool that I teach of different things that we could do with the thought download, but I think that's beyond the scope of doing it, talking in a podcast. But what I would say for somebody for self-coaching is get space from whatever that thing is going on, so that you can start having more of an objective look at it. And you're going to get like, let's say someone's really angry, like with the example I gave. They're in emotional dysregulation, right? But if you're sitting and you're writing it out, just writing it out will actually regulate yourself. But the part where you're going to have like an objective look, that's only going to come from when you're regulated, right? So you're not really going to like, if someone's like stewing in anger and then they're like trying to figure out why and what story they're making up, like it's all mushed together, right? This goes back to like the mental mess.
The mess,
Versus
yes.
you regulated yourself, and now I can have, now my adult brain, my prefrontal cortex can come on board and have a real objective look at this to kind of really see what's going on. So the thought download is even like a step to getting there, because you're going to regulate yourself just by getting it out. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. I'll tell you what comes up because actually quite a few people have been bringing up this idea of writing these things down. And what I've noticed, because I've tried to implement these things for myself, um, is that usually when I'm in such a state where I'm either like very angry, very anxious, very overwhelmed, I don't feel like I have in that moment the ability to sit down and write. I feel so I guess it's the word uncomfortable or just overtaken by the experience that usually I try run
Yeah.
away from it. And it sounds like it's more of like an embracing of when you're sitting down and you're letting yourself write. It sounds so good when I hear it. And then every time I'm like, yeah, okay, next time I'm going to do that. Um, I usually just turn my phone on or do something distracting because confronting it in that moment seems very big. If that makes sense.
Yeah, you know what? You actually brought up a really good point, and the truth is that because when you described when you're like flooded with an emotion, that isn't really the time to self coach. That's the truth. Like the sitting down and writing
Okay.
is even that the act of sitting down and writing could be calming for somebody, but really that part, the self coaching part, comes after you've processed the emotion. So
Hmm.
really, when the first step before you're going to try to like get your thinking brain back on board when you're flooded with emotion is actually just to regulate your nervous system. But what you brought up was kind of interesting is like we have an emotion that is like really big or really uncomfortable to experience in our body, and then we can there's different possible ways that of things we do to the with that emotion, right? And what you brought up is actually what I call buffering or numbing, right? Distracting ourselves.
Hmm.
Let me just go on my
Yeah.
phone instead. Like I don't want to feel this thing. I'm going to go on my phone. Let me just, whatever, eat 10 bags of cookies or whatever, right? Like we just that actually is not a so we can buffer or numb or which is distracting ourselves from an emotion, and it usually has a net negative consequence, right? Then we feel really gross. 3 hours later, we feel like we wasted our time and we didn't even do anything constructive. Like we just feel yucky about scrolling or whatever, right? Another thing people do is what I call vomiting their emotion. They react to it. So I'm feeling this in my body. Now I'm just going to yell at everyone around me. I'm going to snap at
Mm.
everybody around me. Right. So that's another way where I'm like, it's not actually useful for the emotion. Right. So we can resist it. Oh, sorry. We can like numb and distract. We can react to it. And then the other one is like resist it. The other one that's not helpful. So three not helpful, and then the one thing that we
What's
actually want to do. But
what's resist
resisting is
it?
kind of like, yeah, it's like pushing it away. Like I shouldn't feel this way.
Hmm.
There's a lot like it's like holding a beach ball underwater and it's only going to stay down for so long before it pops back
Hmm.
up, kind of thing.
Yeah.
So it's like there's no reason I should feel sad. There's no like I don't even have a good reason to be sad. There's nothing to be sad
Just
about.
push
Like
it
that's kind
down.
of like resistant. It's like just go away. I don't want to feel you,
Hmm.
right?
Okay.
So none of those are actually helpful. Really, the emotions just going to come back up or seep out in in our life in other ways. And what we really want to do is feel our feelings, process our emotion, or is like the words that people use. But essentially what you want to do is like just understand that it's just an emotional experience in your body. It's just a physical sensation. Your body's just feeling physical things. And if you just allow it to be there, it will cycle through. Like emotions don't last very long in our body. Some of the, I mean, depending, but like, if you just think about the last time you were feeling super anxious, you're probably not feeling super anxious right now as you're listening to this podcast. Maybe some of you are, but like just right, like emotions come through our body, they cycle through. It's energy in motion. So if we can just like let it be there without resisting it, without reacting to it, and without avoiding it, right, then it will just kind of like run its course and do its thing. And then once we're back into a space of regulated, then doing a thought download and really questioning and getting objective and like, then all of that will be more effective.
Mm. So, Mike, why can't I just wait the emotion out while being on my phone? Like, won't it leave?
Um,
Can't it leave
so you
while I'm?
could, you might be able to. Like it depends. If someone's like really stressed out about like an assignment that they have to write for school, right? So they're
Yeah,
super, 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 super stressed. They hate the feeling in their body, so they go scroll on their phone. Guess what's going to happen when you put your phone away?
you're still going
Your
to
stress
feel
is all
it.
going to come right back. Like you didn't,
Right.
right? So
Hmm.
sometimes like so it could it be that someone's just kind of having like a meh kind of day, or they're feeling kind of frustrated. They go on their phone, give themselves a break, and then afterwards they feel better. Yes, and that's why I'm like, you could intentionally distract yourself, but that's not like that's why I said it usually has a net negative consequence. Like you can intentionally give yourself like chill out time on your phone because it'll just kind of like help you pass some time, relax, and move on. But usually the way I look at like buffering, numbing, distracting, whatever you want to call it, is like self-sabotaging habits that we do that actually have a net negative consequence, right? Like then we go and like eat 2 bags of chips, we feel disgusting, we weigh more,
Hmm.
we just don't like the effect that we just, and then we didn't actually handle the emotion. We didn't deal with the emotion.
Hmm.
We just did something else,
And the
whatever it is.
vomiting one might like is a tricky one because you might think I'm expressing myself, I'm yelling at everyone, I'm getting the emotion out, but then you're just in a fight with everyone when and no one's
Yeah,
talking to
no,
you.
right,
So
exactly.
negative there as well.
You're just
And
taking it
obviously,
out on
and the
people around you and then you
suppressing,
ruin your
yeah,
relationships.
right. And then the suppressing
Yeah.
also it's just pop up in other places. Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
um this is so interesting. So to before getting to the self-coaching, which is very like logical mind situation going on, we want to
Yep.
be in a state where we feel like the emotions are not going crazy. So you say it, so
Yeah.
what I'm hearing is kind of like the power of just sitting with the emotion, um, and
Hmm.
just like letting it pass through your body. Are you able to describe maybe a tool or some sort of idea of what that means? Like, what does it mean to let an
What
emotion
that looks
pass
like.
through
Yeah.
your body?
Yeah. And also when I say when I say sitting with it, like I want everyone to know that processing an emotion, you can go about your day. Like you don't have to. Someone could be like, I don't have the luxury to just sit and process an emotion. You don't have to just sit. You can you can go about your day. So an example could be, let's just say I I don't know. Let's just say I got a phone call that kind of like, got me. I don't know. I'll make up a story, but let's just say like a relative called and they said like, I'm not feeling so good, and so I went to the doctor and I'm waiting to hear my diagnosis. Yeah. So then you get like all anxious and nervous, like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen? But then all your kids come home from school. So now you're like, have this like very anxious nervousness inside of your body and your kids are there, right?
Hmm.
And now you want to like take care of them and deal with all their needs. Okay. So again, if we're going to like numb or distract, right? Someone might just go and like eat a bunch of cookies or just go on their phone and try to like get their kids to like go away or whatever. I don't know, like some way that they're trying to just distract themselves. Resisting it would be like, okay, just, you don't need to feel this way. There's no reason to feel this way. You don't even know what's going to happen yet. It could be fine. It could be fine. Stop feeling nervous. Like, right? Like that's like resisting it. And then reacting to it could just be like you're snapping at your kids because you're feeling so nervous and anxious in your body. Okay. So obviously now what we want to do is like, what would that look like if I'm still taking care of my kids and I'm feeling nervous and anxious in my body, right? So the first thing I like to do is just like name it, like, okay, I'm feeling anxious right now. And then I like to describe the physical sensation in my body. Like, okay, my chest is like pumping, my hands are a little like clammy, I feel a little tense by my shoulders, right? Like I'm just kind of like, okay, this is like the physical experience that I have right now. I'm feeling kind of anxious. And if I can, I like to correlate it to a thought that I'm having. So it could be like, I'm feeling anxious because I'm telling myself that like it's probably going to be a bad diagnosis, right? So it makes sense. If you're thinking it's going to be a bad diagnosis, then you're like anxious. So I'm just like, okay, this is what's happening. I'm feeling anxious. It's my heart feels this way, my chest, my hands, my shoulders. Okay, it's okay. It's okay. I can feel this way. It's okay. Like, and you're literally like kind of, coaching yourself through just like allowing it to be there and like, it's okay as I'm handing my kid their lasagna and like, okay, I feel this way, as I'm, doing homework with my kid and I'm just like, okay, here, and like, you're just literally allowing the physical experience to be there
Oh,
with the discomfort of it, with whatever it is, right? So that's why I'm like, it's the simplest of all the four things because in a sense, you're doing the least. You just have to not do those three other things, right? But it's the simplest, but it's also the hardest, right? Because automatically we want to like, so it's definitely a skill to build up, but it's 100% possible to like have a sensation in our body and still operate and not take negative action.
okay, that's so helpful. Because when I hear sit with emotion, yeah, as you were saying, I imagine sitting, going somewhere quiet, sitting on the bed, not moving, and waiting till it goes away. Yeah, which is not so practical when you're living your life and feeling all these emotions all the time. So what I'm hearing is
Right.
just getting really aware of what's going on and telling yourself like, this is why I feel this way, and then just letting yourself feel it. And then I
Yeah.
guess at some point it's just gonna go away, right?
Yes. Yes. Or also just pay attention, especially because we love it when it's like, I have this strong emotion and I need it to go away. But even just pay attention to like it lessening. Like, oh, before I was at a level 10 in my stress. Now I'm at a level 7. Oh, now I'm at a level 3, right? Like, even that is, I think, very empowering to realize, right? Because sometimes we're like, but it's not away. It's not away. I'm like, right, but you're also doing so much better than you were an hour ago. Like, just noticing that itself is the power that we have over our emotions to magnify them, like to make good ones feel even bigger and greater in our body or to minimize them is huge that we have that ability. Yeah.
Wow. Wow. And then once we're in a state where we feel like the emotion is not in a hold of us very strongly, you're saying that's when we would then maybe do something like a thought down. It would be like, okay, what's going on? Why did that happen? How can I maybe,
Yeah.
I don't know if it's avoid it happening in the future or like deal with it better, not feel this way all the time. That's where then the thought downward would
Right.
come
So let's
in.
the example I gave, let's say after, maybe after your kids are in bed and you've kind of put your feet up on the couch and had a cup of tea and whatever, and you're kind of like not feeling as stressed and anxious anymore, but it's still there. There's still something really bothering you, right? So let's imagine I did a thought download And I was just noticing that my brain's like, it's going to be awful. It's going to be a bad diagnosis. And then this is going to happen. And right. Like, and then from that like objective place, I could see like, oh, wow, my brain just went to worst case scenario, right? My brain it, like already created 5 stories. And then what are the facts, right? What do I know? All I know is that they're waiting on a diagnosis because their head has been hurting, like, or whatever. Like they're waiting to hear back about their blood tests. Like that's all we know. So it's like, I know this, I don't know these things. My brain just went to worst case scenario and created a lot of stories, right? So that's like what I mean by like the self-coaching. Then we can start questioning the stories that our brain is telling us, right? We can start leaning into possibility. Like it's possible there's a bad diagnosis and it's possible that there isn't, right? There's like a lot of different, tools or just different exercises that we can do to kind of shift our brain from being so set that like, here's what's happening. And that's why I'm creating so much anxiety in my body versus like creating a different kind of emotional experience.
Wow. This is a lot of stuff that I'm thinking right now. I wish I had known. So definitely answer my question there with that. What are there limitations to this? Are there people or scenarios or situations where the inner world experience is too much for us to deal with on our own? And how can we know what those are?
I mean, in general, we grow in connection. We are social beings. Like we're not meant to go through life on our own. So there's always going to be an interplay of like my own self-work and the things I do for my own growth. And then like, who am I reaching out to and who am I having help me, in terms of like, I mean, let's say specifically coaching limitations, like we're told like undiagnosed mental illness and unresolved trauma is not like within the realm of coaching, right? So there are certain things where like there's something much bigger at play here. There's something more going on. I mean, there's tons of modalities in the world, so it could be that like we're kind of like using a modality that's not really necessarily the right thing for this scenario or something like that. But I mean, I think in general, again, it's gonna boil down to like having really good support systems, having a friend that you can reach out to, having a mashpia, having somebody that you can talk things over with. We grow interpersonally. That's honestly where the biggest growth is going to happen.
That's so helpful to point out because again, when you hear self-coaching and becoming your own coach, it's like, oh my gosh, I can just figure out all of these things by myself.
Yeah, I don't actually think that self-coaching should ever 100% take the place of coaching. I feel like it has its, I mean, everything has its limits, but like I look at it as let's say someone has a weekly coach or whatever, then that's like their weekly like deep clean. And then the self-coaching is like the little tidy ups that you do along the way. But there's times even with my own self-coaching, we like a person is too close to their own brain, right? Or like we're considered our own relative in halacha and whatever. Like, so there is places where we're going to like kind of hit a wall. Like we can't do it on our own. And we're not meant to. It's okay. It doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you. It's like, it's not like, oh, look, I'm going to learn the art of self-coaching and then I don't ever need anyone again and I've got it all figured out. I don't think that that's the reality. But on the other hand, it's a beautiful skill set and tool to have because then you're not like, oh, I need a coach every day then. I need someone to walk me through all the things, right? Like, no, you're also very capable and smart and can, grow your skill set. Yeah.
And then, because again, I was saying the limitation, and then it could be that you'll bring something up to your coach, and the coach is going to say, okay, listen, like you need to deal with some sort of trauma, or you need to deal with some sort of maybe there's a mental illness here because, and in those cases, I'm assuming it's really not enough to just like deal with trauma just maybe with coaching, although maybe it is. I'm just making assumptions here. If somebody realizes like there's traumas coming up. I'm actually going to be interviewing, please God, soon a psychologist like specifically about trauma because I'm not so
Oh, wow.
good at knowing exactly what that is, or that like maybe there's some sort of mental illness here. Would that be a situation where it would get passed on, or is that also able to be worked
Yeah.
on sometimes in coaching?
No, I've had situations where, I've had different situations, but some where like from the get-go, I didn't think that coaching, but like some people were like, no, I really want to work with you. And I was like, listen, if like coaching, like there, you see progress and you like move the needle. And if there's no progress and we're not moving the needle, then we're going to just know that this wasn't the right thing. So that was the case with some people where like, and that's what ended up happening. And then I like, some of them went and, got different help. Some people went and it ended up that they needed medication and they came back to coaching. And then some people, or as soon as I I feel a little bit like we're spinning our wheels in the mud if like, and then I can tell that there's something else here. There's something more. There's something. And so that has happened a few times. And then some people came back when they were ready for what coaching can offer. And some people, got to themselves. So there is a range, but usually the way that I see it is like when I don't see forward movement or progress, then I know that like there's something more that they.
And that's why, again, it comes to really helpful to have that support system, because you can't always know, like, when when the wheels are spinning in the mud, when you're moving forward, when you're not.
Right.
I'm trying to think, is there anything that I didn't address or speak about that you think that we should, or any one kind of tool or idea that you want to leave these young women with before we go to the final question?
I mean, you had asked me, right? How could a young woman learn to navigate overwhelming situations that feel too big for them? I do think that we touched on this, but my first response is like, let's not expect us to navigate overwhelming situations by ourselves. Like we did talk about this, about like emotion, right? Like the definition of overwhelming is that you're not in your thinking brain anymore, right? You're flooded with emotion, and it's very normal when you're doing something yourself that it feels very big. And I probably that would be the biggest like thread of this whole conversation, right? Is for to know that like we're meant to have support, we're meant to have a network of people, we're meant to grow in a relationship, and when you go over something with somebody else, it can really, really, really help. So I don't think we're meant to do things alone.
It's really hard though, because a lot of girls, when they leave home, they're in a new environment where they don't know anyone. That's really like the times that are so overwhelming for us. Usually we feel like we have the least amount of support. And we're not going to just like run to the head of our seminary, for example, or, we don't know anybody. So what should we do there?
Right. So hopefully in those situations, hopefully at least you have support from your life, like in your life, right? Like it could be that you're in a new situation, but you still have your mashpia, you still have your really good friend, you still have, your good relationship with your mother, whoever it is of like people that you can call, hopefully. And then the other thing to know is when you're in new situations, it's going to feel awkward to reach out to someone new, It is, it's going to feel awkward, but like again, the kind of back to the confidence almost, right? Like it's going to feel awkward until it isn't, until now you have a new person, a new piece of support a new person to be supportive in your life, right? And to know that help is always available. There is help. There are like to not think that we need to do this alone. And so if we can like get past the awkward or the newness of it, then we get to the other side of the issue.
That's super helpful. It's going to be awkward, but it's going to be worth it.
Yeah.
And then we'll get that new support system closer to where we actually are right now. I end off with a question which is theoretical, that if you could go back to the first year that you left home, so the first time that you were living away from home, and you can share with yourself only one thing based on everything that you know today, what's the one thing that you would share with yourself?
Whew. So the first time that I left home was for 9th grade. I went away for high school. It sounds a little bit like cliche, but like it gets easier. By going through the hard, what I would share with myself is just to know, like by going through the hard, you will, that's how you're going to get to the other side of this. By going through the newness of being away, or the homesickness, or the self-consciousness of being in a new place and a new grade and amongst all these new girls, and like all of that, like it's like the only way to the light at the end of the tunnel is to go through the tunnel, and so you keep going, and then on the other side of that is like the person you become.
That's taking me back to what you said about dealing in those situations where there's very strong emotions, that like the hardest one is just being with the fact that it's really difficult and uncomfortable, right?
Yeah.
As opposed to, just like what I'm hearing is you're saying that just be with like the situation is hard, and don't try and avoid it or like vomit it out on others or just suppress it. Like it's allowed to be hard and it's okay. And then from letting yourself experience that, it's gonna get better. That's just how I like interpreted what you said based on what
Right.
you just spoke about. That really comes together. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like we want to only have positive emotions, and then because we only want to have positive emotions, we're like do all these negative things with our negative emotions that then like make that whole experience worse, right? So it's the same thing. It's like if we want to only have a positive experience in life, right? Then like we don't get through and learn and become the person that we need to, So it's like someone who I know right now is like not so happy in the school they're at. My first reaction is like, okay, let's switch schools. Let's find you a better fit. Let's go somewhere else. Let's this, let's that, Until my mashpia was like, no, like this is where they're supposed to be. This is where they're meant to be right now. They're going to learn so much from going through this experience and having this, having this experience of like navigating when it's not so great and when it's not exactly how they want it to be. And so like I completely like switched my mindset in this, for this scenario of like, okay, here's where you are and how do we navigate it? And like to realize like on the other side of that, right? On the other side of the hard and the challenge and the difficulty is so much learning and so much growth and so much of like, not like we don't want to say, we shouldn't try to save ourselves from all hard experiences. So.
Wow. I'll end up with this just Shab, because this just happened 2 days ago that someone that I know they just came to a program and they were having, it was very difficult. They were going to leave that night. They just came and they were going to leave. And the head of their program told them, like, just wait 2 more days. Because if you leave right now, then you're never going to know how you dealt with it. Like all you're going to know is that you ran away from this thing. And that's all you're going to know about yourself. Yeah. And like, even if you leave in 2 days, just give it 2 more days, sit through it for 2 days. And then I just heard that this person is actually staying in the program now. So that's huge. Wow. That's huge. And that's so helpful. And thank you so much for all this incredible, incredible wisdom that you've shared.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of On Your Own. If you liked this episode or think it will be useful to someone else, please leave us a review wherever you listen to podcasts. I would love to connect with you. If you've got any questions, feedback, or ideas for future episodes, you can email me at onyourownpodcast@gmail.com. See you next week, and in the meantime, happy adulting.